Hey y'all, I'm Sunny Shell, and tonight we're going to talk politics and religion. So sit back, buckle up, and let's get to the sunny spot on Skeptic Haven. Hey everyone, I want to welcome my guest, Nick Suter. How are you doing
Hello.
tonight?
Doing good, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be back. I've been gone for a while. I was sick and then I had a bunch of work stuff. So I'm really glad to be back. And I'm especially glad to be back because of the topic that we're having tonight, talking about religion and politics. And
Mm.
it's very prescient right now with all that's going
Huh.
on.
Oh.
So let's talk a little bit about you first. Tell us who you are and why you're on the show tonight with this topic.
All right. I am a writer. I wrote several books, and mostly the one that was the most successful was a rebuttal to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. It was hailed by the Midwest Book Review as a brilliant rebuttal to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and required reading for anyone who questions authority in this country. About 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, I started doing some YouTube stuff. I work from home, so it turned out I could do it well. Started my own channel. It's called In Time. It's an educational program. We usually cover politics and culture, whatever's going on in the world. We're going to have some fun with what's going on with Twitter. That's talk about a dumpster fire. So we're going to be talking about that later tonight. But and so that's it. So I did create a anti-theist website called the Humanist Codex. That was a collection of arguments for against organized religion, but from a more humanist perspective. And so I take politics very seriously. I'm very much engaged in politics. I also take the problem of religion in across the world, but this country in particular, in the U.S. in particular, quite seriously. So that's why I'm interested in this topic.
Well, thank you so much. I'm actually looking forward to getting your book. So we will definitely put some links in the description so that people can check that out. I'm just curious, is it on Audible by any chance?
It is not. I keep meaning to. I mean, there's a whole process and yada yada yada, and I've never gotten around to doing it. So, what I may do is hit up Seth Andrews and go, "Hey, listen, do you feel like?"
Yes, if you do that, I will have it in paperback and I will have it on Audible, and I'll just listen to it
My
over
wife,
and over.
my wife will friggin' get that on Audible. She'll have 6 copies on Audible. It'll be like, you realize you can have just one copy of it because I know it's Seth Andrews.
Yeah, exactly. He has just the best voice ever.
Yeah.
All right. So off of that, we'll talk about. I want to talk especially the probably one of the biggest things in um, in our country right
It's
now.
already started. It's already started. It's been like 10 seconds. I've been humiliated about Seth Andrews and the $400 suit. All downhill from
Yeah.
here.
So I want to talk about Christian nationalism. In July, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a Republican, if you can call her that, from Georgia, said, "We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists." And that is a very scary thing to me. But I kind of wonder if people really understand what the term means. So I kind of wanted to get into that a little bit with you. So, what do you think the most dangerous part of Christian nationalism is for our country?
Well, first, let me say, and we should get into what does Christian nationalism even mean. But one problem with it is it means different things to different people, and they can equivocate on it. It's the same way that we've all dealt with when we're talking with theists and we talk about faith, right? They say faith isn't blind faith; it's trust with knowledge, with experience, and then later it's blind faith, and they use it interchangeably and try to get things in through the back door. It's the same thing with Christian nationalism. In its weakest form, all it is acknowledging that we were built on Christian values, which is debatable depending, but in the sense that they mean it, no, we were not. And then they try to make it palatable in that sense, and then they get in through the back door that it really means a tremendous amount more. What I find so dangerous about it is the same thing I find dangerous about organized religion, which is that it gives it gives you warrant to tell other people how to live their lives. I have absolutely zero objection to people who have any religious faith whatsoever that informs how they live. But my objections start immediately and quite rapidly at the point of, well, my God has instructed me to tell you how to make your life better. And what makes Christian nationalism so dangerous is that it's now not only that we're going to sit there and tell you that who you marry is subject to our moral beliefs and laws and we will judge you based on them, but now we're actually going to legislate that. And I would have no objection whatsoever if it were based on some defensible principle, even a religious one, that had evidence and was something more than your belief in a deity that you simply have faith in and nothing else. No, it has to be justifiable. There's warrant for taxes. There's warrant for enforcing laws in this country, and we do so with good reason. There is no reason. The Bible reason does not apply. So it becomes very dangerous, and it now has the backing of the police, the military, all that other stuff. It is extraordinarily dangerous, especially when a lot of Christian nationalists are also Christian Zionists and want the world to end and are more than happy to help it happen. So
right, absolutely. You just when you said that made me think about the 7 pillars or the 7 mountains or whatever. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Pillars.
They have the
seven pillars of Islam.
Yes, and we're seeing that in our Christian nationalism as well. I mean, they say that they need to incorporate schools, and then another one is government, and another one is, I think, like you were saying, the police, and then economics, and all of this to kind of create that Christian nationalism. When you said that, that just popped into my head. But one thing that we were talking about before the show is we need to understand what Christian nationalism actually means. And the Pew Research Foundation did some really wonderful surveys and studies on the change in Americans' views of Christian nationalism. And we noticed when we were talking before the show that back in March of 2021, 69% of the respondents in this survey said that the federal government should never declare any religion as the official religion of the U.S. However, in September of 2022, 60% said that the founders of America originally intended for us to be a Christian nation, and 45% said that the U.S. should be a Christian nation. That's a huge, huge jump in a relatively short amount of time, and that is extremely scary to me. Extremely scary. What do you think caused that change?
Trump. Trump has try to figure out what Trump's appeal is. It's again different to different people, but I think one of his biggest appeals is that he takes people in groups who feel marginalized for one reason or another, and it turns out most of us are part of some minority somewhere. So it's not that hard to feel marginalized. Me, I don't tell many people this, but I'm a child survivor. I have 2 kids, and it's just, you wouldn't even believe. But so we all feel marginalized in one way or another, and we all feel victimized, and most of us are victimized in one way or another. Life is hard, but what Trump was able to do was to take otherwise really the luckiest lottery winning groups like white males in this country, but any number of other ones that really have won the lottery by many respects, and made them able to stand up and say, no, here's why I'm marginalized. This is who's taking my job. This is who's making my life harder. This. And there's actually some truth to all of it, but there's truth to a lot of stories. And most of those stories are not the biggest problems we have facing ourselves today. But he made it that way. So then people started to feel like they could, the thoughts that they had about how they really thought things should be, whether it's, and some of it is the most disgusting stuff that you really like, we actually should have a black nation and a white nation, or we should get rid of the Jews because they're the problem, or whatever it is, that's suddenly almost encouraged to say and think. And so the people who would never have said it and would have, even in a quiet, by themselves, filling out a form, would have said, no, of course we shouldn't be a Christian nation, because they wouldn't dare give voice to that thought. Now they're like, yeah, we should. And it's Trump. It's the fact that you can now say or do anything that they're feeling empowered to say and do these things. That would be my guess.
What's interesting is you are exactly right about the Trump kind of effect on the U.S. I completely agree with you. I also think that it has to do with Obama, a reaction to the first black president, and that Trump came in right at that time where they're feeling like they're completely losing the power. And so Trump gives them that ability to then say, whoa, hold up, this whole politically correct crap is ridiculous. And they're able to use the Bible just as they did during slavery, to use the Bible as a tool to say, this is why I don't think that black should have this, or that Hispanic should have this, or whatever else. They use the Bible in the same way that the Bible has been used for millennia, well, for thousands, the last few thousand years.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's an excellent point. I think it has to be made. So I'm really glad you pointed that out. There were actually, I think, two problems with Obama. First, when he passed Obamacare, and I remember Jim Boehner sitting out there, "Hell no, you can't. Hell no, you can't." And I was laughing my ass off because I was like, dude, we just fucking did. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to? But there was two problems with that, which is, first of all, what I realized later was he wasn't talking to me, and he wasn't talking to the rest of the House, which is who I thought he was talking to. I realized, no, he's talking to all the constituents who realized that they just had something shoved down their throats. And not only was it shoved down their throats, but it was shoved down their throats by people, including a bit like me, who said, you're too stupid to understand why socialized medicine is better than the system that you want. So we're just going to pass it, and who gives a fuck what you think? And there was genuinely that attitude. And while I agree with passing it, and I still am for it, I think there was a bit of a heady feeling of, we had elected Obama and we were doing all these things. And I think there was a lot of condescension, and a lot of their views don't matter anymore. And I think that was a huge part of it. And the other one was, he was the first black president. There was certainly some racism there. I was on the Obama campaign. I loved the people, usually in New Hampshire of all places, where you'd knock on the door, say, I want to talk to you about Barack Obama. And they said, I ain't voting for no, hit you with the N-word. And you're like, great, thanks, have a good one. It's like, if he really didn't want Obama to win, he'd sit there and say, oh, tell me more, and soak up my time. Instead, he was just sitting there going like, no, I ain't doing it. And I was like, well, hey, somebody will at least admit why. So thank you very much. We'll vote for you. But I think for the people who don't get homosexuality, they don't get how or why boys could kiss. They don't know how to change the clock on their 8-track Betamax VCR, which is still blinking noon. They're intimidated by technology. They're intimidated by, and they want life simple. And that's okay. I get that. But sometimes, most of the time, it's just not simple. And the problem is, some of them were racist, and some of them were just like, the world is changing too quickly for me. I didn't think I'd see a black president. I didn't think I'd live to see I was on the campaign. I didn't think I'd live to see a black president. So even for me, it was like, wow, the world is changing faster than I thought it would. I can only imagine what somebody born 20 years before me who would have no objection to a black president on paper, but is now seeing everything that they thought should be X, Y, and Z is now upside down. It's got to be scary. And then Trump comes along and says, nope, nope, all that's bullshit. We're going to just do it our way, and you can think whatever you want. And no, we're going to, yeah, I can see why it's attractive.
Yeah, I agree with you. That you bring up a really good point too about Obama and the way that they did the Affordable Care Act. And I kept thinking about how the New Deal was done because it was kind of the same thing. It was pushed down people's throats as well. But they had a campaign of education that went all, and they had to actually physically go across the nation because they didn't have TVs and, well, they anyway, but it wasn't as mainstream as it is now. And so they had to physically go around and talk to people, talk to their constituents and say, hey, this is why we're doing this. I mean, they made it a massive campaign. And here we're in the information age. There's no excuse. There's no excuse. It was people like you and people like me who were in the trenches trying to explain it and trying to, to get people to understand and be very careful with it as well. Because at least where I'm at, very, very ultra conservative, small town, mountain area. Yeah, it's beautiful, but gosh almighty, it is so completely backwards. I mean, they have like Trump train things going by all the time, and it's just ridiculous. But I was the face of Obamacare when it first came out because I was here trying to sign people up and get them educated. And that's a very dangerous thing. Very dangerous thing. It would have been nice if we would have had help from the federal government instead of crickets, which is what we had. A lot of it was crickets. And, so I think you're exactly right. And change is difficult for anybody, but I think you're right. We have had a lot of change in a very short amount of time. You talk about, a boy kissing another boy. Now we have with the entire LGBTQ community, it's like our next generation is totally embracing it. Even in this backwards community, the kids are embracing it. They're okay with it. It's their parents and grandparents that are freaking out about it. And
Yep.
all of that is leading to this. It kind of feeds into that Christian nationalism because they want to get back to their interpretation of a biblical truth or whatever.
I try to caution people in general against an instinct we all have. I have it as much as anybody else, which is we only know how good we are as people relative to others. We like to think that, no, we've got some standard metric. We really don't. The man who teaches his slaves to read, who takes good care of them, makes sure that they get 3 meals a day, plenty of rest, and does all of this for his slaves, is a saint, absolute saint 200 years ago. And is a monster today. Same guy, same actions. But if we measure ourselves relatively, what that means is there's no difference. You feel as good about yourself if you elevate yourself and make yourself better in some way, as you do if you make other people worse. And we don't think of it that way, but that's usually how it works out. That's why people like dumpster fires. That's why people like to watch other people tearing each other down. That's why Jerry Springer was so popular, was because you feel better about yourself. Just watch, and you don't have to do squat. You can just sit there and watch the television. I take a look at conservatives, especially older conservatives, and in my head, it goes through my mind all the time. Oh, you fucking idiot, you moron. And I want to say that, and I want to act on it. And what I realize is, look, I got my BAs in philosophy and psychology. I know how the brain works. I know that the more information you have, which you accrue new information, yeah, your memory gets older. You're still accruing information and life experiences throughout your entire life. The more information you have, the more any single change on something fundamental actually affects a much larger network of beliefs and information. So the fact is, when I was in high school, it never crossed my mind that really boys kissing would be a thing. It was, of course, happening all around me. It's just nobody talked about it and nobody admitted it and so on and so forth. But it never crossed my mind. Now, in college, I started to learn about it. I met lots of gay people, became friends with gay people. I was like, oh, okay, but I only have up through college of life experience and understanding how society works to rework in my brain. It ain't that hard at that time. But if you've had 2 kids, you've gone through 20 jobs, you've gone through this whole thing, there's a lot more of your brain that needs to change. And you think it's the same fact, it should be just as no, it has to change a much wider network of information and what associates with it. And it gets scarier and harder the older you get. So I want to judge these people. I do sometimes. I try to remember, look, there are legit, straight up biological reasons it's going to be harder for them to get it. And some do. Some are, you know what, you meet plenty of older people who are just like, hey, what the fuck do I care? People, I don't want people telling me who I can kiss. I don't tell other people. So, everybody's different. But I think that's why you have a harder time with conservatives who tend to be older and yada, yada, yada. I don't think this is anything anyone doesn't know. And I try to figure out how to, the thing you're talking about really earlier was communication, how much infrastructure we have, like the internet and so on and so forth. That's all great. But I've met plenty of people who can't communicate and who sit there and just try to info dump on people and stuff like that. And it's like, that's not how it works. And so the old fashioned skills of communicating with people with whom you disagree are becoming actually more and more important. And the reason is because that information is coming faster, but fewer and fewer people have the skills. So that's where I think Democrats should be focused on, is how do we talk to people and how do we do it without this, listen, we're right, which, by the way, I happen to think we are. We're right and you're just going to do what we say. No, that's no.
You have a very good point there, because we look at the information age from a very different perspective than, say, someone in their 70s or 80s. Because we look at the information age as social media, and I think that one of the problems has been that we don't communicate in person as much. And of course, COVID made it 10 times worse. But we're used to being keyboard warriors. And instead of actually engaging in a topic, and Twitter, Twitter is just awesome with that, because not only are you a keyboard warrior, but you only have so many characters. so you could just like flame someone and then walk away.
And they actually did several studies on what would be the appropriate number of characters to maximize what you can say while minimizing your ability to be understood. And that's why they increased the character limit, was to meet what they found was the sweet spot of maximizing the actual content you can put out while making sure how you could be understood. It was just under the limit required to make yourself clear.
I'm not shocked by any means. I'm so not shocked. And I think communication is probably the biggest problem that we're facing, because not only are we seeing it from our inability to communicate effectively with each other, but then you also have our news media, which has become, well, they say that there's the mainstream media and then the truth, which is absolute crap, because all of the national media are owned by, I think it's 7 major corporations. And so we are told what they want us to hear, and they're dividing us kind of on purpose. Although I would say that, and maybe it's my bias, but I do feel like there's one side that has truth, or at least closer to truth, and the other side is just pure propaganda. That's kind of my probably my bias, but I think it is much more difficult to get the truth.
May I ask really quickly, do you mean the other side, or do you mean specific networks that are on the other side, specifically conservative?
Yes, I would say specific networks, and I would say it's getting worse. I always said that Fox News was the single worst thing that ever happened to the United States, but boy, I didn't have any idea how things would go when you have OAN and Newsmax and some of the other ones that have come out since then that are actually mainstream for conservative.
All right,
It's
your
like that's
audio.
where they go.
All right, hold on a sec. Your audio just got really weird for me. I don't know if it did for you, but there's something happened on the back end on the thing here. But I think you're okay again. So sorry. Please continue.
I know that's okay. And I'm not hearing. I did hear a beep kind of thing, so I don't know what that was.
I
Hey,
think it was a super chat, but it altered the audio. But everything's okay now. We're good. We're good.
that's what it is. That must be what it is. So thank you, Dan. I'm not into long-term commitment for for now. I love you. I love that. Thank you so much. um, so let's see what was my thought process there. Oh, about I was thinking that Fox News was like the single worst thing that ever happened to us, but now there's OAN and some of the others, and they're the worst thing is that there's nothing overriding, and no overriding. um what am I trying to say? No one is regulating it. No one is looking to make sure that there is actual truth going out. It's just kind of whatever they want, and it's becoming the mainstream for that conservative Republican, that Trumpy base. That's all that they listen to, and they take it as gospel truth. And that's scary to me.
I think you should be willing to question any news source that you listen to. It's been my experience people on the left are somewhat more aware that MSNBC is on the left, and that while you may enjoy it, you should be a little judicious in taking everything it says as fact. They nonetheless consider it a trustworthy news source. People on the right not only consider Fox News a trustworthy news source, but think it's in the center, and think that, at least the ones who follow it, it's certainly not every conservative, and think that it's for the most part the most unbiased organization you're going to see out there. That's a hell of a different view on two biased networks. MSNBC is biased to the left, but the left usually is at least aware of it. And Fox News is absolutely biased to the right. And in my view, they are a step more than just biased. They are a propaganda arm of Rupert Murdoch. And deliberately so. I don't think he cares about the truth. I think he cares about making money. And I think Fox has figured out Fox has done what essentially the Tea Party did, which is figure out how to get older Americans to empty out their pockets to hear about a time that the Leave It to Beaver time, which actually never existed, but in their brains maybe kind of did, and they get to relive it. It's a great It's great for making money, apparently, and it's served them well. It's phenomenally dangerous, and I think Rupert Murdoch is pretty keyed into just how dangerous it is. But he's not an American; he doesn't really care.
Absolutely, I think you're absolutely right. Now, one thing that we were talking about earlier was about people understanding what terms mean, and I kind of want to go back to that, because one thing that that a lot of the atheist activists try to do is when they are engaging in those conversations, the first thing I hear it, and I would say the ones that we see a lot on YouTube anyway. Ask people, so what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? What does faith mean? Like you had mentioned that earlier. And that's kind of stuck in my head about something that we really need to be doing more often. The Pew survey actually kind of did that. So they asked 2,540 respondents, in your own words, what does the phrase Christian nationalism mean to you? And I thought I would tell you a few, because I found them quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Go, hit me.
Okay, so one said, allowing prayer in school, but only Christian prayer and no other religions, allowing religious statues on government property, allowing Christian churches a voice in politics, but still not requiring them to pay taxes. That's very interesting. This one I found extremely interesting, though.
I want to make an observation, which is okay. So all
sure.
of those are about allowing. So far there isn't. Now there's no genuine Christian nationalism that I'm aware of where the word allow is in there. It's not about
That's
allowing.
right.
But that's what I said earlier, though, which is that's how they view it themselves. They say, no, we're just looking for this baseline, and then they're gonna. But that's really interesting. So I apologize for interrupting, but I
Oh
wanted
no,
to point
that's
that out.
okay. The category for that one, the age range was between 50 and 64 for that respondent, and their religious affiliation was none. This next one, though, I find extremely fascinating. So this person said that to them, Christian nationalism means violently forcing Christian values into the social and political sphere, incorrectly believing that America is God's chosen nation. And the reason I find that so interesting is because this came from a born-again evangelical Protestant. And I find that completely fascinating. I agree with it. I absolutely agree with that. I would not say that I would agree with many born again evangelical Protestants on something like this, on this type of a question, but they were pretty much spot on in my view, violently forcing Christian values into the social and political sphere. So, what do you think about that one?
Christopher Hitchens got into did a debate series with the Reverend Douglas Wilson, who was a Calvinist, and it's the movie is called Collision. It's pretty good, and you can see them debating. But in it, he asks Wilson a very telling question, and I liked Wilson's answer for any number of reasons. What he said: if you were to encounter a Canaanite child, would you do as God commanded? Because this commandment still exists. There are no Canaanites left, but the commandment is that believers should smash the baby's skull with a rock. And so Hitchens asks him, would you smash his head with a rock? And he says, yes, absolutely, but without a hesitation. This is Douglas Wilson. This is like an modern American minister. And I will say this, whether you agree with him or not, whether you like him or not, I can tell you this, he read the Bible and he understood it. He understood it. And anyone who says that that's not what he's commanded to do doesn't understand the Bible. I'm sorry. There's some things you can't get around, and Wilson understands the Bible, and at least he's not the hypocrite of people sit there and say that there's nuance in what God wanted you to do. There were examples of the Bible of how to do it. This answer that you just gave reminds me exactly of that answer. Now, this isn't somebody who's throwing himself under the bus, but yep, he's got it right. That's exactly what actual Christian nationalism is. That's the goal. That's the only goal. And anyone who says otherwise, it does not understand what they're talking about.
Right. I agree with you. And what I find interesting is that the move that we've seen, what we're seeing right now, is not something that has just happened since Trump. It's actually been in the makeup for many years. I mean, it's been an orchestrated, calculated, very clear plan. You know, they were looking at it, and I say they, but what I mean is Christian or at least conservative Republican politicians. Whether or not they're actually Christian is I don't know. But they're at least utilizing the Christian religion and their followers as a means to their end. And they started this way back in the 50s. And they were long-term, goal-oriented. And I think the problem that liberals have is that we are a big tent. And it's like, herding cats. We've all heard that. Getting people to come together and make a long-term goal, that knowing that short-term they're going to lose, or we might see some losses here and there, but the long-term is what we're going for. That's something that cannot be stressed enough, and we can't overlook that.
The Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line, and that is absolutely true. And I'm not entirely, it's not necessarily always been true of Democrats and Republicans, but I do think it is almost a priori necessarily true of liberals and conservatives. I think that the conservative mindset is to the establishment, to the order, and that means even if you don't like your candidate, you will get behind them because that's the only way to survive in the political sense or whatever sense you're talking about. And for liberals, if you're not if you're not changing the system, if you're not making the world a better place, if you're not advancing change somehow, there's no real point to life. So they won't really put up with being told what to do even by each other to a whole heck of a lot of degree, which suggests to me, now this is very self-serving, so it's something that I just sort of think about and I haven't settled on, but it suggests to me that liberal ideas are better. And the reason it suggests that to me is because if they can compete and regularly win, we lose regularly too, but we're competitive without that kind of unity, without the fall in line kind of all of us get behind, that suggests to me that we may be onto something. But again, that's very self-serving. It's easy for me to say that.
Well, I completely agree with you. Like you said, if we don't have that mechanism and the ability to have a unifying theme like Christianity, and yet we're winning, that's quite interesting. And that kind of brings up what Aaron Coalson put as his super chat, thoughts on the midterms. I think we have seen that, and we've heard, and that's all anyone's talking about, is we didn't have the red wave, we had the red trickle, or we had the red whatever. It's gotten crazy with that. But do you have any thoughts on the midterms as far as this topic is concerned?
Cautiously optimistic. Midterms generally favor Republicans. They don't favor the out of office party in a down economy. They literally, this is the first, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that we've had a down economy and the incumbents party did not lose the Senate. If they didn't have it already, this is unprecedented. So you have a Republican advantage midterm, you have a down economy and an incumbent Democrat. All of the math said they should have won the Senate, and they didn't. The math also said they should have slaughtered the House, and realistically speaking, they could still lose the House. They probably won't, but they still could. The fact that that's even on the table suggests to me that there's a repudiation of the not the people of the last administration as much as the ideology of it. Now that you have to be careful with that, because I think there is still a very large group that is going to get more vocal as they feel power slipping. And I think it doesn't look on paper, if you take a look at the news, if you take a look at what's happening, it looks like the MAGA people are just as strong as ever. But the reality is they cannot possibly be, because if they were, they'd have won this one, and they didn't. So right. I'm cautiously optimistic that indicates a change of the wind, and likely a permanent one, unless some unforeseen circumstance occurs.
Which makes me want to go into another subject. Before we do, I want to thank Dan, Aaron Coalson, and Farron Salas for our first super chats. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate that. You guys are awesome. Now back to what you were just saying, that do you have any idea why? I have an idea, but do you have any idea of why we've seen this change, and what may have kind of been a unifying theme? We talked about how we don't have Christianity or those types of things necessarily, but what do you think may have been kind of maybe a powerful cry, in a sense, to have affected the midterms in the way?
I think in part it's the hangover after the party. I think people are kind of waking up and saying, wow, some of this really has been crazy. It's very hard to be in a party that says that they support Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's unhinged. She is genuinely unhinged. And I understand the ability to rationalize it and say, oh, she's just colorful, or whatever you have to say to, again, get behind her. But I think they've reached a point I'm going to talk about two groups essentially. There's sort of the people, and then there's the movers and shakers, which are two very different groups. For most of the people, I think there's a large segment that will never abandon Trump or MAGA, but I think there's a group that can be pulled away from it, and I think they're starting to see that some of this is just out of control. I think that January 6th has had more efficacy than people would have thought. It wasn't the panacea change that I think they were hoping for, but it has had an impact, And the fact that he's about to get indicted, the fact that he's gotten hit from Washington, there's not from Washington, from New York, and I don't see the Trump organization even surviving that. I think people are saying, okay, do we really want to keep sitting around saying that this is our guy, or do we want to move on? Now, but this may mean DeSantis is next. The ball may be in his court, but until he moves on that, which he can't for a little while, I think the power starts to diffuse. I also think that for Republicans, because it's stand in line, it's get in line, Republicans care a great deal more about the coattails. They care about who can benefit on the ticket from whoever is running. And they are keenly aware that Trump is a drag on the ticket. They blackmailed Trump. They publicly made it clear they were blackmailing Trump. He said he was going to announce, and he said no. The Republican Party said, no, we don't want you to announce until after the midterms, because they knew it would get them slaughtered. Or he said, no, I'm going to announce. And the RNC was like, we're paying a lot of your legal bills from when you were in the White House. And gee, if you announced you were running, we couldn't show favoritism by still paying those. So you're going to be on the hook for $44 million. You want to announce or you want to wait? And he was just like, okay, I'll wait. But it's I think they're realizing that his legal troubles will surpass his ability to deal with them, and will surpass his financial ability to deal with them, and that he is on some level done. Nobody wants to put the nail in the coffin, because he can still do serious damage, but he's going down. So they're just going to wait for that to happen. Then they're going to regroup and come at the liberals with DeSantis or somebody they think can do it. Mm-hmm. What's yours? You seem to have a specific thing in mind. I'm curious. I'm very curious to know what that is.
Well, I honestly believe that women came out, and men who support women came out. I think that the younger vote, the youth vote that has always been kind of absent, was massive this time. We had a lot of people, and typically people don't vote as much in the midterms as they do in the general. And so, I think, or the presidential cycle. And so I think it's just fascinating that we had such a large, record-breaking turnout. And I honestly feel that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is what has kind of galvanized us, which is what producer Wes had questioned. What do you think of the Supreme Court problems as far as the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and would it help for Biden to elect more? I assume what you're saying is for Biden to get more Supreme Court justices in. And I think that is an interesting topic. But what do you think about Roe v. Wade? Do you think it was as galvanizing as I think it was? Or was it just one of multiple factors and kind of they all even out in a sense?
There are only two tragedies in life, only two. One is not getting what you want. The other is getting it. I think by getting Roe v. Wade, at first it seemed like a huge win for conservatives, and it was, because there was a huge wave of momentum, and they've been rolling back 50 years of liberal legislation in a year and a half. Yep. That's staggering. So it's been a huge win for them. Now, what are they going to platform on? Now, when they're trying to get people to the polls, their biggest issue that they've been getting money from, they say, we're saving babies' lives. And here's the interesting thing. It's a constituency that is really easy to the quote unborn is the greatest constituency on the planet, because you don't actually need to give up anything to advocate for them. You don't need to put up money. You don't need to say we're going to get shelters. You need shelters for the homeless. That's a constituency that's going to cost you something if you're going to advocate for them. Vets too. Vets are heroes to this country. So you'd think, let's advocate for them, except it's going to cost you money to do that. You're going to have to get people to help with the shelters and get treatment for PTSD and all these other things. The unborn is a great constituency, because who could possibly be against an unborn child? And you can sit there and say, think of the children, but you don't have to pay for baby food or anything like that. In fact, you can just give it up as soon as the child's born and say it's somebody else's problem. It's the best constituency on the planet. They just lost it. There's very little that they can do now. Now, I do think they're going to try to get abortion banned in the U.S. There's a couple of avenues towards that. But they've lost the funding that comes in from that. They've lost a lot of religious support. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of other complaints that conservative or right-leaning organizations have had against the conservative or against the Republican Party are now a lot bigger because they've accomplished the one big thing that was the cornerstone of their platform and getting it done. So I think you're right. I think there's always, I mean, there's a lot of straws on that camel's back, but I think that was a very big one. And I think without that, we probably would have lost this one. Yes, I do think that the Roe v. Wade and women who were really pissed about it. Without that, we probably would have lost the Senate. Almost certainly would have lost the Senate, I think.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think I agree with you that they've kind of lost some of their capital. I think that they could, or I worry that they could get some of that back if they are able to say that we're not going to do all abortions. If they start rolling it back and saying, well, if they're, if the mother's life is in jeopardy, or if there's an actual case, like it's been brought before the court system, whether it's been adjudicated or not, of incest or, something like, but only those cases that are being adjudicated in court that will do that. They might kind of get some of those, because there are even some Christians who were not happy with that, and some conservatives who were not happy with it. But I think if they move that goalpost just a little bit, they might get them back, and then we might lose some of that momentum that we have. It's possible anyway. What do you think?
I think it's possible. I think that's one of the ones where, for the platform, I don't think they're going to make any major changes, and they're going to let people go their own way on it. So if you're in a state that's going to say, yes, we're going to have exceptions, you can do that and not go against the RNC platform. If you're in a state that says no exceptions, you can do that without going against the RNC platform. So I don't think the RNC is going to clarify. I do think the decision is going to be left up to 5 people. And I think the 5 people, at least 3 of them have already indicated on paper how they would vote if they got it. And that case is, in fact, I think there's 4 petitions that went before the Supreme Court. Right now, it looks like they may reject all of them. I don't know if they're waiting for the perfect one, or if there's a possibility they're not going to handle it. I doubt it. I think Alito and Thomas are dying to declare that you are a citizen at conception, and they just need the right case that comes before the Supreme Court and take it, and boom, there you go. It's decided by them, so it doesn't matter what the RNC platform is, and there's essentially no consequences for them, which is by design, but take it or leave it, that's the way it is. So I'm concerned about what they're going to do, and they haven't taken a case yet, but they have options, and they're going to be getting more options throughout. I mean, people are tailor-making cases for they're engaged in lawsuits just to lose, just to go to the Supreme Court, which is essentially what happened with California and gay marriage. So,
yep, that's exactly right, and that's another one that's on the chopping block as well. They've actually come out and said that, which blows my mind. They've like showing their cards because they know that they have such a major majority, and like you said, there's nowhere else. They make the decision, and that's it. And so they're just telling everybody, hey, we're going to start looking at all these other things like gay marriage, and they have the possibility of truly devastating and decimating democracy as a whole in this country and human rights as a whole. That's kind of scary. So I wonder about the question that Wes had, going back to his question. What do you think about Biden and Congress? With the Senate, I don't know that we can or not, but what do you think about us being able to get more Supreme Court justices in beyond the 12 that we currently have?
My understanding of the process has I thought I had a decent understanding, and someone challenged it, and it may be that I'm wrong. My current understanding is that Biden can actually at any time, without legal review, nominate as many people to the Supreme Court as he wants, and then it just needs to be confirmed by the Senate. What somebody had suggested was that it's a 50 plus to nominate. I doubt that. I would imagine it's subject to the filibuster. I think that was one of the problems that Obama had getting his nominations through was the filibuster. But still, I thought you needed to actually pass a law to do it. And my understanding now is that apparently you don't. He can actually just nominate people at any time, but I think he'd still have to pass the 67, and I don't think he could do that. History is not kind to people who pack the Supreme Court. Trump got away with it, and I think he will get away with it. I think history will have far more to say about him than packing the Supreme Court. But I would like to see a larger Supreme Court. It should be larger. It needs to be more diverse. You can only do that with a larger Supreme Court. There are advantages to diversity I won't get into now, and I suspect most of the audience is well aware of. But, the size was designed for a much smaller country and a much less diverse country, and we need a larger Supreme Court. So I think if he's smart, what he'll do is make some kind of deal where he says, okay, he's going to nominate 2 justices. Whoever wins the next term nominates 2 justices and then 2 more in the term after that. And then you have a balanced court and everybody has an option based on who wins the next presidential election. It's fair. Probably wouldn't go for it because it's still, they have to be, they wouldn't do it unless they were guaranteed of winning the next election. But I think that's probably the best way to do it. I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, I think it is a good question. And I don't know if I wonder did he have what was there a filibuster with Obama's? He had kind of that lame duck at the end, and they had a majority, a pretty good majority in the Senate. So it may not have even been a filibuster. It may have simply been that they just said no, we're not going to do it, and they had such a large power in the Senate.
Well, no, it was it was Mitch McConnell. He was the whatever. It's not the majority leader in the Senate. I forget what the title is, but he gets to set the agenda. So what he does is, and this is why losing the House even by 1 seat is actually relevant. If you lose it by 1 seat, then the Speaker of the House gets to make the agenda, and that's not hyperbole. They just get to say we're doing this vote at this time, this vote at this time, and so on and so forth. They literally set the agenda. Same thing in the Senate. Senate Leader Mitch McConnell said, okay, we will vote on your judges. I'd be happy to vote on your judges. I'm scheduling the vote for 1 day after your last day in office.
Right. That's what it was. You're right.
The board.
I could not remember what it was when you mentioned that, but yeah, okay, that's exactly what it was, which is so
there's no vote. So and then it's just, which obviously is a complete subversion of democracy. We mind a little less when it's our side doing it, but the filibuster should be gone, and you should have the Senate should change its own rules saying that when something is up for a vote, the vote should be held within, say, 6 weeks or whatever, and make it, so that those kinds of politics can't be done. And not against politics. We all play politics. What I love about the title of the show is religion is politics. I mean, religion is politics. It's just another venue, but there's absolutely no difference between what goes on at the Vatican and what goes on at the White House. But I think if they could change some of those rules so that the needless stuff, like just not permitting a vote and the filibuster, that just slow the system down and turn it into a quagmire where nothing can get done until there's so much horse trading that you've got more pork than actual legislation, which is just it's a serious freaking problem. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what about, and I know that this doesn't really have to do with religion, but I am curious now that we're talking about the Supreme Court. Do you think that there should be some type of fundamental change with the way the Supreme Court operates to have some type of oversight, and I don't know who that body would be. I mean, I really don't know. All of our other judges are elected, and it's a very political, it's along party lines and all of that. I don't much care for that. The Supreme Court is supposed to be not political, but of course, that they are. We all know that they are. But what do you think that we could do, or should we do anything about the way that the Supreme Court currently operates?
Two minor changes, and only minor ones. First, the Supreme Court is actually the only court in the judicial branch that is not subject to ethical review. Justice Roberts just spoke on this a while back, saying, we are, of course, above review for, he gave a practical reason, saying who's going to review the highest court in the land. That's a practical reason. It's a cop-out because there's checks and balances. There are ways to do it. And then he also said, it's like, well, sort of like we're the ethical standard by everybody else. I'm sorry. You cannot look at Judge Thomas and say that he is an ethical standard for fucking anything.
Absolutely.
He has violated what under any other lower courts would have been any number of ethical conflicts and law rules. And he's above reproach. And that is the antithesis of any successful political body in any government on the planet. There has to be checks and balances. That's why it's the cornerstone of the Constitution. So the first thing you do is Roberts or somebody toss out this notion that they're such a great court that they are above the standard ethical practices of conflict of interest and yada yada yada, and they're above it. They literally do not have to recuse themselves ever. And there is no recourse if they fail to do so. There's just none. So it doesn't matter if we knew that Ginny Thomas was going to be in those tapes, and everybody knew, and then Thomas said, "Nope, I'm going to vote on it anyway." There's nothing anybody can do. He can't even be really reprimanded by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So that has to change. Just hold the court to the same standards as every single lower court below it, and allow those standards to be enforced by the Chief Justice and maybe some oversight in case he's of the same party as the others. But that's the first thing, because the Chief Justice has no real power. So they have to follow the same ethical rules as every other court below them. That's the first thing that has to change. The second thing that has to change is just this attitude that we cannot or should not impeach them under any set of circumstances. They're as impeachable as the President of the United States or any other member of public office. They are all impeachable by the exact same process. We can impeach any member of the Supreme Court. It's just been anathema. It's been this kind of thing that we don't do. And I think we should sit there and say, okay, it is an option. I don't want to see it weaponized. People are talking about impeaching Biden and all this other stuff. It's like impeachment was not supposed to be a political tool. But so realize that we have that tool available and feel more free to use it. And B, hold them to the ethical standards that already exists in the executive branch for all the courts except that one. Those are the two changes, and they're actually really minor. Those are my only two contributions.
That's awesome. If I could, I would give you a high five and standing ovation and all of that. That's perfect. One thing that I saw in the chat that I wonder how you feel about is what about not having them be lifetime appointments? If they were not, I don't know the timeline that would be, but how do you feel about the lifetime appointments?
I've not seen any convincing argument that it's a huge problem. It's a bit of a problem. It's a problem when they stay longer than they should because they don't want somebody else to get their job. They try to leave during a presidency that is ideologically equivalent to their own ideology. So, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is dying, but she has to go into work because if she doesn't go in with a broken rib and all of this other stuff, a president that she doesn't like and a party that she doesn't like is going to get her seat. So I would like to see a way to avoid that, and removing the lifetime appointments would help with that. I don't think it's as big a problem as people seem to think it is. They're like, well, because of that, they can act. It's almost Thomas Hobbes's argument in Leviathan was the original idea behind it, and then the counter. It's the same argument. What happens when they're sort of above any kind of review? The original argument was, well, that's how you know they're going to do the right thing because they can't be bribed or bought, and there's some truth to that. But that's also been problematic. I think so far it's actually worked more often than not. I think our biggest problems, the other problem is, okay, 3 of the justices lied to get onto the Supreme Court. They lied under oath as to what they would do if they got a Roe v. Wade decision. They lied on a whole bunch of senators and congressmen have stepped out and said I was lied to. Okay, fine. Would a shorter appointment fix that? Probably, but then again, so would the measures that I just outlined. So if we have another form of and those have to be done either way. So the question is, if we had more accountability in terms of impeachment and more accountability in terms of ethics, because there's an actual codified set of ethics that applies to them, and just use the ones at the lower courts for fuck's sake. If you do that, I don't see that the lifetime appointments is a particularly big issue. I wouldn't be opposed to keeping it, and I wouldn't really be opposed to getting rid of it either. I don't think it's a problem.
Very, very good answer. I kind of like that. I was kind of on the camp of no lifetime, but your solutions make a lot more sense, I think. And how can anyone go against those? I mean, oh no, we don't want them to have any judicial review. You know, who's going to say that? He's going to come out and actually say that. Them. I think Roberts would actually say that, and I think Thomas would
did.
too.
Chief Justice Roberts already did. He came out. He was asked that specific question, and he said,
"Oh wow!"
And he gave 2 reasons. One was a sort of a practical: how are you going to have a judicial review for the highest judicial body on the land? It's like, okay, that's a cute argument, but there are problems with it.
Yeah.
And then he gave a practical one, and then he gave, it wasn't a moral one, but I forget what the word is I'm looking for, but he gave another argument that was sort of based on the fact that basically they are the creme de la creme. They're already at the top because they have the highest ethics. So it's absurd to even suggest, he actually basically suggested it was insulting to suggest that they need any kind of ethical review. At that point, I'm sitting there going, okay, he did not drink the Kool-Aid. He backed up like one of those water tankers filled with the Kool-Aid and has just been chugging on it since, like, he's and then he did a hit of acid because he is that disconnected with reality.
Well, he's also able to feed his own ego. You know, he kind of has a God complex. I guess he is. He expects everyone to worship at the altar of the Supreme Court. I mean,
he actually, I'm gonna say the opposite. I think he's got an inferiority complex. I think that's how it's expressing itself. But here's the thing. He knows this is a mediocre court. He knows he is losing control of the court. He knows it is doing unethical things, and he knows he cannot stop it. He knows that chief justices are actually remembered. They are not remembered by the average Joe, but oh my God, Chief Justice Earl Warden, Chief Justice Rehnquist. If you're in law, those are the most important names. If you're in government, you know these chief justices. And right now, he is going down as one of the worst chief justices in a generation, and he knows it. So the reason he's saying things like this is because he thinks if he says it enough, he can make it true.
Yeah.
He's failing, and I think he knows it. That's my view. So yeah, I think it's he's steering into the skid. Yeah, he knows.
Well, we are at an hour, and I want to be very respectful of your time. And it's like, oh, I have so many more things I want to talk about. It's not fair. It just went so fast. But I do want to say, yes, you're absolutely right. And most people who are feeding their own ego, it does come out of a sense of inferiority. That's really what I think we see more often than not is. But anyway, so what are? Well, go ahead.
I can probably stay for about another 20 minutes, and then I got to prepare for a show on my channel. But I've probably got 20 minutes if you'd like. I'm more than happy to. So.
Oh wow! Well, absolutely. If you will stay for that, that's awesome because this is such a great topic.
Oh, thank you. I've been having a blast.
I have been too. I will tell you, most people don't know this about me. They know I have a degree in psychology. They don't know that I also have a degree in political science. And with my regular job, I use psychology all the time. That's what I do. But I don't get to dabble in the political side, except in politics that are in office, in the workplace and with my board and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't get to really dive into the American political part that feeds me. So this is like, I just love it. I love having this conversation. So
I was actually going to make a reference to, and I forgot, and it just became relevant. So there was, I think it's 14 of the 36. No, it had to be more. I'm sorry. It's 13 of the 84. Jesus, somewhere in that vicinity. Okay. I think I got it right now. 18. No. Okay, it was 14 of 84 is what I'm going to say. Of the fake electors have been subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. So there was some 84 fake electors. It's in the high teens, the number that they've subpoenaed. One of those issued an emergency request to the U.S. Supreme Court to block the subpoena. That came out today and was it wasn't denied. They just refused to hear it. So they decided they wouldn't hear it. But what was interesting is Sotomayor. People get concerned when, like, okay, Thomas blocked or he didn't block, but he suspended one of the subpoenas until they could hear it. And they're like, oh my God, it was actually in his jurisdiction. Any one of them would do it. And Sotomayor blocked this one. So this was a subpoena of one of the fake electors going to the January 6th. And Sotomayor blocked it and said, okay, you're going to stop with the subpoena until we decide whether or not we're going to hear it. Today, they decided they're not going to hear it. So the subpoena is going through. All our phone records are going through. 2 justices, all they had to do was keep their mouths shut. They couldn't. They decided to come out and say that if the court had chosen to hear it, they would have voted to uphold the block, to block the subpoena and to keep it. Would you care to guess which 2?
Oh, gee, would it be Thomas? Could it possibly be Thomas?
Are you psychic?
Yeah.
And it's like, why announce that you've already made
Roberts.
Up your mind?
I didn't say Roberts.
No, it was Alito.
Okay. Same thing.
But now there's another one. So I guess Trump was supposed to show up today for testimony of the January 6th committee, and he failed to show up. So now they're talking about suing him, and it looks like he's going to issue an emergency injunction against that, and that's going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But I mean, they're literally, if you're a justice, you don't sit there and say, "Oh, we'd love to have voted on this." Everyone else is not going to look. So we just want everyone to know we'd have voted to block it. Yeah, it's not political at all. Sorry. Anyways, I forget what you had been talking about. I'm sorry. I'm off the rails now. So what were you saying?
No, you are absolutely fine, because this is important. I mean, if I don't recall any other Supreme Court justice going out and saying that, saying, well, if we would have decided to hear it, I would have voted this. I don't think there's ever been a time that has happened. Am I wrong, or is that correct?
I don't recall one. It's a long history of the U.S. Supreme Court, but I don't recall one, and that's reasonably counter to how the Supreme Court operates. Now, to be fair, it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who dramatically violated the unwritten rules of the Supreme Court by starting to talk politics and by saying that Trump was an unhinged lunatic with, delusions of grandeur and all that other good stuff. I'm ambivalent about whether I think she should have done it. I was glad somebody did it. Somebody had to do it. I do agree with the the Supreme Court staying out of it. And I think once she did it, everyone else just started. So that precedent has been set by her. And for better or worse, I think history will be a better judge than any of us can be right now. But I agree with you. It's all of this is brand new, uncharted waters, and the idea that there's no. Roberts is sitting here saying what is actually usually reasonably true. It usually is actually reasonably politically free. They have their individual ideology, but it's very hard to push one of these judges one way or another because there's nothing you can hold over them. That's kind of the point. But having said that, to come out and say, well, gee, I wish we could have heard this case, so I'd have voted against it. They're not even supposed to say that, because what that's saying is they've made up their mind before they've heard it. They haven't even heard the arguments. They know the original case, but this was an appeal, which means they haven't heard the case for the appeal yet. But they're saying, I've already made up my mind. I would have accepted the appeal. It's like, excuse me. it hasn't been argued on any court on the planet. It hasn't been argued. How can you say you've already made up your mind? It's stunning. And they know that because they're lawyers too. They know that that's the consequence of what and they don't care. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Wow. So the Sinister Porpoise, thank you for your $2. He says Nick doesn't pay his head mod.
Well, yeah, here's her problem, which is no, she's got a real problem with this one, which is she's a solipsist, which means she's the one who's not paying my head mod.
Oh, that's just too funny. Okay, now going back, just thank you all for all of your super chats. We really do appreciate it. We recently became monetized and are able to have super chats and stuff. So bear with me. Well, I sometimes miss some of those, and I'm trying to keep up with it. So, but going back to our topic, you brought up Trump, and that kind of gets me back into the religion and politics because one of the most interesting things that I have ever seen in my life, and in any, it's bizarre to me, is that someone who is so against what the conservative, Republican, evangelical Christians have said that they are for, they kind of just threw all that out. Like, oh, never mind. We're just going to fall down at the Orange Goblin and do whatever, and I find that fascinating. I find it horrifying, but I also find it fascinating because that is a whole different level of a mixing of church and state that we have never seen before, where the actual politician, if you can call him that, becomes worshipped as a god. I mean, they have actually put him in the same level as Jesus. Like, they are symbiotic. How do you take that? And have you ever seen anything like that in American? And we've seen it in some of the other regressive countries, but I don't think we've ever seen anything like that here. And what are your thoughts on that?
Got me thinking. Have we ever seen that here? We've seen it on a small scale. I mean, and I'm not trying to be offensive or cute or coy, but Jim Jones. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's and any cult of personality. Mm-hmm. There was a cult of personality around JFK. There's been cults of personality before. This is a cult of personality, but it's religious and it's fascist. It's decidedly fascist. That's not one of the things that ticks me off is people like to throw around the word fascist and Nazi and all this other stuff. And then the problem is when you have an actual fascist or an actual Nazi, you don't have any word language you could use to describe them. Mm-hmm. It hasn't already been watered down by all of them. I can't think of an example of a leader of any significance in the U.S. that has had this kind of religious pull, despite the fact he's not religious. I mean, he's, if you see him holding the Bible, I've never seen somebody more uncomfortable. It's like when somebody who hates kids is being asked to hold the baby and he's like, which end does stinks? Oh, it's both of them. Great. What do I? And then it's just like, that's how he holds the Bible. That's how he held the Bible when he was out in front of the church, in front of the White House. And he tries to quote the Bible and he gets it all wrong. And he, everybody knows I know I've seen this in other countries. I'm reasonably familiar with it as a student of history. I know what it is. And I've seen it in small scale. You can see it on, we do this kind of thing reasonably frequently. You can see it in communities on Twitter. You can see it in any social settings. You can see it in high schools. But at this level, this much power, and having the same religious people who are upset that Clinton got a blowjob, having those same people sitting there saying it's okay that he paid for a prostitute with, it's strange. It's a little strange, and it is a little disconcerting. I've seen it. You study what happened in Europe. Not just, not obviously, I'm not actually just referencing Hitler, but Stalin, Take a look at all of those Mussolini. Take a look at all of those shenanigans. We've seen stuff like this before. It's just there's a difference between reading it on paper and then seeing it and going, "This really." There are people who can make this work. That's weird. It's also I keep it at the intellectual level because if I didn't, I'd run screaming from the room. So I just keep thinking about it intellectually. It's freaky.
But it's if you even think about some of those Stalin, even Hitler, they were charismatic, and they didn't just manipulate people; they manipulated people with an art. I mean, they were articulate, they were intelligent, they used things effectively. Trump is a buffoon, and that I think is the part that I just cannot get over. He says the most ridiculous things. I don't understand. I understand their that he gave them the ability to say things that they didn't feel like they could ever say anymore. We talked about that earlier. The whole political correctness and them feeling like they're losing power. What I can't get is that they would fall so in love with someone who is so like clownish, like used car salesmanish. I don't understand that.
Well,
I don't even know what to say after that. It's just
yeah, you know what? I don't know. Show's over. Thanks all. Great. Good night. We're done. I don't know that we can add to that. Well, I would give two answers. The first is that except he does have a natural talent for gab, and he's got a natural talent for putting people that he wants at ease, and people he wants at dis-ease, and he knows how to do that, and he seems to be able to intuit it. So even though he's a bit of an idiot, he can intuit it. And so when you take a look at the hard sale pressure tactics that he was using, especially, and I loved from this perspective, if you listen to his talking to the Secretary of State of Georgia, and you can see him applying these tactics. And frankly, if that guy had been by himself in that room and it wasn't being recorded, I could see him having a harder time. But he had backup who was used to being played, and it was all being recorded. But he's sitting there going like, what can you do? We got to come up with something, because this is what and you don't want to be held accountable if they find out that. And I'm sitting there going, that's actually some pretty high pressure stuff, and he knows how to apply it. So I think that's the first thing he's a reasonably skilled salesman. And that's selling anything. It's not even just selling like things that he owns. It's selling agendas he wants. It's whatever it is that he's trying to sell at any given time. And that seems to have served him reasonably well. The other thing is Hitler wasn't all that bright. In fact, Hitler was a bit of an idiot, and this shocked him because this shocked all his generals, because he'd keep giving really bad military strategic advice. He'd be sitting there telling the military how to do shit. It'd be dead wrong, and it would work. And it really frustrated the living daylights out of people, because they're like, this shouldn't have worked. And they're like, it's so stupid. That's why it worked. Nobody ever thought somebody would be dumb enough to try this, and it fucking worked. That is the first half of the war from Nazi Germany's perspective. And that's basically the first half of that's all of the Trump presidency. We're like, oh man, did he just tell the Russians to hack into Hillary's email? And it's like, oh, that's it, game over. You can't say shit like that on wait, they elected him anyway? Wait, no.
Yeah.
No, they didn't. No, what? You can't say shit like that on television to get up. Okay. So I guess I did too much mescaline. Is that what you're saying? Because I don't know. Too much or not enough? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that happened with Hitler, and there's a lot of writings on this, and it's fascinating, where people said he seemed like such a buffoon. I felt he couldn't actually do anything bad or dangerous, so he'd just be kind of a clown in office, and I could trust him because I'm smarter than he is. And I think a lot of the people on the right who we think are idiots and don't realize that, of course, he's not the common man, because he literally shits on a golden toilet. Everybody knows he does. and he goes around going, well, I'm the common man. I think what they see when they look at him is, okay, he ain't perfect, but he ain't going to be able to pull the wool over my eyes. I'd rather have a kind of an imbecile in office who's going to, go in the direction I want to go in, stay the course. If he tries to do any shenanigans, I'll be able to catch his ass. Yeah. So I think that's what it is. And typically the ones who get control, either you get the cult of personality, the Jim Jones or whatever, or the ones who seem like a bit of a buffoon, and they're like, oh, okay, I can trust this guy because he's too stupid to do anything bad.
That's both of those are very good points. Very good points. And we're getting close to being over, but I do want to have one more question that Wes had put up. What do you think of constitutionalists as a position? That's a really good question. That might be too big for the half a minute we have, but that's a really good question. I should have put it on earlier. So what do you think of constitutionalist?
Constitutionalist. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. So if I could get a definition, I would be happy to.
So what I'm thinking, and I could be wrong, he might want to put another thing up there, but what I'm thinking he's saying is the constitutional conservatives that say that they are strict constitutionalists. That they,
originalists.
Originalists, yes.
Okay.
That's what, and Wes, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking that's what he was saying. And how do you feel about them? How do you feel about that as a position?
I think their views are often strawmanned and they're mocked. It's like, hey, this isn't the same world that it was back then. So how could we possibly? But I don't think that for originalists, that's usually what they mean. And they do mean it sort of in the context of what they meant at the day in time, but also recognizing that from that point forward, you can change it, but don't try to change it or go back in time. And so let me think of an originalist position. We do have a tendency to. The objection of most of the originalists, from my understanding, is that what we do is say, well, times have changed, so let's reinterpret the Constitution and just go with what we think it means today and go from there. And the problem with that line of reasoning, I like that line of reasoning, I really do, but there is a genuine problem with it, which is, first of all, who gets to determine what it means today? That's a very subjective thing. And second of all, what happens tomorrow if it means something else? And at that point, what does the language of the Constitution actually mean if it's that fluid? So what most of the originalists will say is if times are really changing, great. The Constitution has a way of dealing with that. You amend the Constitution, or you do. I think that's a valid point. I would be more impressed with that point if we could amend the Constitution in a culture as divided as this, and get 2/3 of the governors or 2/3 of the legislatures or 2/3 of the legislative bodies to do it. It's not going to happen. I don't see us amending the Constitution at any time. And our founding fathers wanted things to go slowly. And this is actually something we talked about earlier about how slow things are.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to slow things down. And I think that was actually a good idea. It could be hard to sell on that, but you don't want to be making too many rapid changes in a country. Liberals are very bad at that. We want to change everything all the time. And that is one place where conservatives can slow us down before, like, the idea of squirrel.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad thing. But it's too slow to be able to do some of the original purposes, to use some of the original elements of the Constitution, like constitutional amendments. We can't do that anymore, and we're paralyzed by various other things.
Mm-hmm.
So I empathize with the position. I think the position is strawmanned by many liberals. It is a stronger position than it gets credit for. But in the end, I think while the more liberal interpretation of the Constitution based on the current times, while I think that one has more drawbacks than we're willing to acknowledge, it is more fluid and able to deal with a rapidly changing society better than originalism.
Awesome. Again, another great answer to the question. I could honestly talk to you for hours. So I would love to have you on our show again. Maybe we can come up with another topic. And in fact, I was looking on your YouTube channel, which everyone needs to go to. It's called In Time. We'll have the link up. But I know that you have a show coming up. I think it was on the 17th about the psychology of politics. Was that correct?
Oh,
I may be remembering it wrong, but
yeah, no, we are. I'll be there, but I won't be chatting much. So Christopher Mowdy, who was actually in the live chat here earlier, he is going to be on with Brooks, and they're going to be talking. Brooks has done a lot of commentary on our channel for a number of political things. He is extraordinarily well versed in politics. We love having him on. He was on for most of our January 6th coverage. And Mowdy is a professor of psychology at Rutgers University. And Mowdy and Brooks met for the first time on one of our streams not that long ago. Mowdy was just like, I got to talk to you more, man. So we're having the two of them get together. That will be on Thursday. The other thing that we're having that we're very proud of and that we like to do, we've been covering Ukraine, and Operator Starsky is a Ukrainian National Guardsman. He's been on the front lines. He was called back to Kyiv and has been reporting out of Kyiv for any number of sources, and we have him on every Friday at 1. And this is a guy who is, I mean, we've literally had difficulties where he's had to evacuate. He's being shelled. So it's sort of like, Nick, I could talk. I was like, no, put the phone down and find shelter. I'm okay. What's that sound, Starsky? He's like, everything's fine. But we're going to be having him on to talk about the Ukraine war on Friday too. So I like to think we always have a lot of good shows. So, but that, yes, you are correct. It's going to be Mowdy, Professor Christopher Mowdy, and Brooks will be on discussing. Mowdy will be presenting the psychology. Brooks will be talking about the politics, and I think in particular they wanted to talk about also how does cognitive dissonance work? How can we vote against our own interests? How do we not understand what our interests are? And how do we choose who we follow? How much of that is rational thought and how much of that is appeal to some level of emotion? So I think that's going to be most of the discussion on. Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward.
I'm going to be watching that and taking notes. So absolutely. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really, really, really enjoyed it. And I want to thank all of the people who were in the chats. If I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate all of you and our super chats. If you do like the content that we're doing here, remember you can always support us by liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting the bell, all those good things. But if you want to, you can also become a patron. I always say Patreon. I did it again. You can become a patron. You can go to our Patreon account. And I want to thank our current patrons, Michael Wiseman from The Bible Says What, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Deborah Grace, Aaron Coalson, Phil Calderone, and me. I want to thank our producers, Wes, Phil, and Kat, and our booking team, Wes, Raymond, Ellie, and James. Remember, we have other shows. We have Secular Soapbox, Women Atheist Unload, Global Atheist, and The Bible Says What. So check all of those out. And in the meantime, don't forget, always think critically. Good night, everybody.